From the headquarters of the Guild of Champions, this is the Becoming Thin podcast, and I am your host, Chris Terrell, and welcome to another week of your weight loss quest. How did this last week go for you, champion? What new challenges did you encounter? But more importantly, what failure did you go through, and what lesson did you get from that failure? Come on now, don't let a perfectly good failure go by without you getting your lesson. That's your reward for your troubles, after all. Now, if you're new here, I've lost 125 pounds myself after an entire adulthood of chronic yo-yo dieting. Up, down, up again. Before I finally got sick and tired of being sick and tired and fat, and I made some permanent, meaningful, and actual changes to my real-life lifestyle, habits, routines, environment, community, and to my systems of belief. Because it's all 6 of those things that created the results in my life that I didn't like. And if I wanted to get results in my life that I did like, I was going to need to go change those same 6 things. And now I'm here each week to help you change those 6 things so that you can get the results in your life that I know that you would like to have. Thanks so much for being here. We are continuing our journey of taking listener questions from the Becoming Thin Facebook group. You can join that by searching for Becoming Thin on Facebook or heading to becomingthin.com. You'll find a resources link there with a link to the Facebook group. Would love to have you be a part of that. So for the next, I was in the Facebook group and I wanted to do an emotional eating episode. So I posed the question, put your emotional eating questions here, ask me anything. And wow, the group did deliver. There were so many questions. I've got 4, maybe 5 episodes worth of questions. I was originally just going to take the handful of my favorites, but when I just kept grabbing my favorites of like, oh, I want to answer this one. Oh, I want to answer this one. Oh, this would be so good for people to hear. And I looked at my list of questions that I curated. I'm like, oh, wow, this is a big list. So I am going to be breaking it up because I want to answer each question with a little degree of detail. And so we're going to do several this week. And then for the next several weeks, we are going to be all about emotional eating as I churn through all of these questions that were submitted. So to everybody that submitted questions in the Becoming Thin Facebook group, thank you so much for doing that. You've directly helped make the next several shows great. And I think they're going to be good. But before we dive into the questions, let's get a fix on emotional eating. I want to frame this entire conversation with something that might shake up how you've been thinking about the emotional eating part of your journey. And I'm going to read to you an excerpt from a book I recommend often on emotional eating. It's called The 8 Keys to End Emotional Eating by Dr. Howard Farkas. And in the book, in one of the sections early on, he breaks down one of the most common misunderstandings about emotional eating, one that I used to think, and one that's many people deal with, and that is thinking of emotional eating as an addiction. And I thought we could talk about that for just a moment before we dive into all these emotional eating questions for the next several weeks. But in the book, he says, using the term addiction to describe emotional eating isn't wrong if it's meant as a metaphor, like, I'm addicted to this chocolate cake. Resisting an unwanted impulse to eat can be just as difficult as resisting any chemical addiction. But sometimes, when the term addiction is used literally, it blurs an important distinction between psychological compulsions and chemical dependency, and ignoring that distinction can get in the way of overcoming the behavior. That's really important to understand, really important. Because if you believe that emotional eating is an addiction the same way that alcoholism is, then you'll start trying to treat it like a chemical addiction. And that's where a lot of people go wrong when they're doing their emotional eating recovery work. You know, you try to abstain from, your trigger vice foods, right? You cut whole categories out. You label certain foods, maybe even certain restaurants as forbidden, off limits. And then you bring that all or nothing thinking that diet culture is just, in society itself has just beat into your brain. So it's how you think and operate. And you slap this all or nothing thinking on top of the emotional eating problem centered in restriction. Well, you don't even realize it, but you've actually made it worse. Like, treating emotional eating the way you treat a chemical addiction will make it worse. Let me break this down in plain terms for a moment. If you're emotionally eating, you're not addicted to the food. You're addicted to the feeling you believe the food will bring. You're addicted to the pattern. That's the distinction. Emotional eating is a psychological compulsion. It's a learned pattern, and it gets reinforced over time Why? Because it actually delivers relief, comfort, and distraction. It gives you joy. It gives you, sometimes it just gives you plain old stimulation, just gives you something to do. It's not a chemical dependency. It's not heroin. It's not alcohol. It's not something your body will go through withdrawals from. Now, this is good news, right? That would make this much harder because your solution doesn't need to be extreme. You're not broken. You have a behavioral pattern that has got it deeply ingrained into your mind, and this pattern can be rewired, reconditioned. The other thing I think is important as we're getting into this is to realize that not all emotional eating is bad. But a lot of it is, and a lot of emotional eating is quite sneaky. And this we gotta point this out here at the beginning as we dive into these, because so many people, they think like, oh, emotional eating is bad, so therefore we have to not emotionally eat ever. Look, emotional eating, not all emotional eating is a problem. Some emotional eating is fine. Like having a piece of cake on your birthday, that's fine. Cooking a nostalgic recipe that reminds you of your grandma, that's fine. Sharing a treat on a date, that's fine. Those are emotional. It's not harmful, it's intentional. It's part of living a full and connected life with food in it. But the emotional eating that keeps people stuck, it's not that. That's not the stuff that's keeping people stuck. Sure, it can contribute, but that's not what's keeping people stuck. The emotional eating that keeps people stuck, it's the kind that's not joyful, the kind that's not social, the kind that's not meaningful. The problematic emotional eating is the reactive kind, the impulsive kind. It's done in a fog of emotions. It's the kind that happens when you're drained, stressed, lonely, bored, sad, or just totally numb. And the most important thing to realize, though, is the problematic form of emotional eating usually happens in patterns that reoccur. And the patterns don't happen in hours sometimes. Sometimes the patterns happen over days and weeks, from the beginning of the pattern to the end of the pattern before it loops again. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot in today's episodes, how to see those patterns, how to ask yourself better questions, how to differentiate between controlling enjoyment of food and sabotage that's been camouflaged to be okay, right? You might be tempted to think you need to eliminate all emotional eating from your life. And I could see why you'd think that. I used to think that too. But you're going to hear me say something a few times today, which is you don't need to eliminate emotional eating, but you do need to understand it. The goal is not to never emotionally eat again, right? That is not what the goal is. The goal is to become so self-aware that when you do emotionally eat, you know exactly what's happening and you know what happens after, and you're not being victim to a pattern. And later in this episode today, I'm actually going to answer a question from someone asking explicitly, is it okay to emotionally eat as long as you can fit it into your calories? My take on that is going to challenge a few people, I'm sure, because I don't believe in controlled emotional eating in the way that many people do. I believe rather in controlled enjoyment. Very different things. We'll talk more about it later. Also in today's episodes, I'm going to talk about how you can start spotting emotional eating even when you're not tracking calories or following a food plan. I mean, because emotional eating, it's not always dramatic, right? Sometimes it's sneaky, it's boring. I'm just going to grab something to eat real quick. Like, it looks like that. But then you do it 10 times this week and suddenly your weight is trending up and you're like, I don't know why. I didn't do anything repetitively. Every now and then I might grab something because you don't see the pattern. We'll get into all that. So, but let me leave you with this before we dive into the questions. You're not emotionally eating because you're weak. I hear that a lot from people. They want to blame themselves and say that they're weak, or make it a character assassination. No. You're emotionally eating because at some point in your life, food became your tool. It became your comfort, your reward, your escape. And it worked. It might even still be working. But you've noticed something. This tool has created consequences. Consequences you have to continually deal with. And you're trying to deal with the consequences while leaving the thing creating them intact, right? Many of you are going on diets trying to deal with the weight, which is the consequence of the emotional eating, without ever addressing the emotional eating. So this part of the journey, it's not about finding a harsher diet. It's not about finding stricter rules. It's not abstinence and white knuckling, not having anything, because none of that's going to work. That doesn't solve emotional eating. We need a real fix. We need one that leaves you stronger, not heavier. We need a fix for your stressful times that leaves you more peaceful, not feeling shameful. We need a way of approaching this where you feel more in control, not confused. So we'll talk more about these topics as we go through these listener questions. I hope it really helps some things stick with you. So glad to have you here. We'll be back in just a moment on the Becoming Thin podcast with our first question. Welcome back. As I said, all of our questions today come from the Becoming Thin Facebook group. You can join that over at becomingthin.com or by searching for Becoming Thin on Facebook, and you can join the free, that I mentioned it's free, community over there. So our next question comes to us from Laura. Laura says, how do I even recognize emotional eating? I'll ask myself why I want to eat when I'm not hungry, and all I can come up with is, it just sounds good. I question my emotions, and I'm not necessarily feeling any certain way. Nothing is bothering me. I'm not feeling super happy. I'm just feeling neutral. I do have ADHD, so sometimes I think my brain is just looking for a dopamine rush due to eating yummy food, but it's frustrating when it feels like I want to eat for literally no reason. It feels like I'm just fighting myself rather than fighting stress or some emotion. Oh, I wanted to start off the emotional eating series with this question because this highlights a common misunderstanding about emotional eating. The motives, or a misunderstanding around the motives behind the behaviors. And this can be especially confusing for those of us with ADHD or other neurodivergent wiring. I myself am one of those. I have ADHD and been dealing with that my whole life. And it is confusing because emotional eating doesn't always look like sobbing into a bowl of mac and cheese, right? In fact, a good amount of emotional eating doesn't look problematic on the outside or viewed it at all. It doesn't look like a problem when you view it by itself, right? Often emotional eating is very, very subtle than the big dramatic stuff. Don't get me wrong, the dramatic stuff is real and it happens, but most people can recognize that. That's the more extreme things. The gray areas where a lot of the problems are created and get really stuck and hard to change. It's important to understand something, and it's this, that emotional eating isn't always about reacting to intense feelings. That's not what, yes, intense feelings can create emotional eating, but that's not always what happens. Sometimes it's actually the very opposite. Sometimes we're turning to food because we feel nothing. We feel flat. We feel bleh. We feel understimulated. And now we have a different kind of emotional eating. Because what is happening in this moment, especially if you have an ADHD mind? You're feeling nothing, and what is your brain craving? Stimulation. What does the food give you? Stimulation. The food becomes the stimulation your system is craving. It gives you a moment. It gives the moment you're in some sort of like texture and tangibility to it, right? It gives you something to do, something to feel. It's an experience to be experienced. So in your question, when you say, I don't feel particularly emotional, just kind of neutral, that's the big clue that tipped me off. Let's put it to you this way. Have you ever been scrolling on your phone? You click on a video that doesn't even look that interesting, but your brain is like, whatever. It's the exact same mechanism, right? You weren't craving that particular video. What you were craving was a shift in your state. You were feeling bleh, you wanted to laugh, so maybe this video will make me laugh. Man, let's see what happens. You're craving something, and your mind was just looking for a pathway that will take you to that state change. So if you're asking yourself, why do I want to eat when I'm not hungry? And the only answer you get to yourself is, it just sounds good. That's the emotional reason. You want to feel something good. It's not that there's no reason. There's a very clear one. You hit it on the head in your question. It's just not a particularly exciting one, right? It's not complicated. It's funny. As humans, we seem to think that the reason often needs to be something like dramatic or complex. And that can be a problem because we then discard all the little stuff that happens in much higher volume than the dramatic overeating. So in this situation that you've described, it's just not a very dramatic reason. And so it doesn't feel like there's a reason, leaving you with the impression that there is no reason. But hear me, there's always a reason. Always. What your brain's actually doing here is, when you have ADHD, your brain has learned that food gives a quick dopamine bump to the brain. It's like a little reward, right? And so when your brain is craving a reward, it's just going to keep going back to the thing that keeps giving it a reward. Like a dog pushing a button on those little machines that keep giving out treats, it'll just keep doing it. I push this button, I get a treat. So I push this, I eat this food, I get a feeling. So even if there's no stress, even if there's no sadness, even if everything is actually fine. But with the ADHD wiring, we're often, you're feeling a little compelled to chase the next little something exciting that lights you up and excites your nervous system. Like, woo, that was fun. Now, I'm not going to go super deep today into like, how do you do like dopamine regulation or detoxing? Honestly, that's not my lane. So I'm going to stay out of it, but I can tell you a few things. I can tell you something about my life. When I finally understood that my desire to eat was often a desire actually to feel something, my behavior started to shift. I stopped asking myself, am I emotionally eating right now? Because that's really kind of a vague question. I started asking myself things like, what do I want to feel right now? See, that question led me to much more useful answers. The reality is for me, and it sounds like for you too, especially with my ADHD tendencies, I wasn't often fighting stress. Yes, many times I was. But a lot of times what I was fighting was silence. You said something in your question I think a lot of people will relate to. You said, it feels like I'm just fighting myself rather than stress or emotion. Well, yeah, because that's exactly what's happening. We don't see reasons, or we don't see reasons sexy enough to focus on. So since there's nothing exciting or dramatic or huge, we just assume, well, there just must be something wrong with me then. In other words, when there's no obvious emotional trigger, humans have a tendency to blame ourselves. We'll say things like, well, I must be broken. I must be sabotaging myself. I guess I have no self-control. But that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is you're in a moment of stillness and your brain wants out of it. Your brain it's not stress, so to speak. It's not pain. It's the lack of stimulation that becomes the stress. The absence of stimulation is the trigger to eat for many people. We call it boredom eating, mindless eating. It's a classic thing. You're not broken for wanting to shift your internal state. You're human. But the challenge is if you've built up a habit of using food to do it, now you've made this groove in your brain, and your brain just wants to keep doing that groove. It's a rut. It's easy for your brain to do it. And so your mind is going to just take the path most traveled because it's the path easiest to travel. The well-worn path to pleasure is the most inviting to your mind. And that's what happens. And I was realizing this on my own emotional eating recovery journey. And it did mess me up. I lived alone on my journey. I would be home alone a lot. And I'd get home from work, apartment be quiet, nothing particularly wrong, wasn't sad, wasn't upset, wasn't overwhelmed. But I didn't want to feel nothing either, right? Like I wanted to feel something, a little joy, a little comfort, a little buzz. And so for me, like food was always there, right? My mind's always like food, because it's always there. 5 steps from my front door, boom, there's the pantry. I can grab myself a tasty snack, problem solved, right? Except that doesn't solve anything. All that does, if you think about it, by the way, is just delays the problem. Like you're buying what, 10 minutes? The food only provides pleasure for what, 10, 15 minutes, and it's over. And you're right back where you started sometimes. Sometimes we do the food while we're thinking about what to do next. What if you just thought about what to do next without the food, right? Sometimes, though, maybe the cycle for you is an hour or two, right? You have a little food, and then an hour or two, you do the cycle repeats. Oh, I'm bored. What do I do? Let's eat. Let me think about what I want to do. Oh, let's go do that. You stop eating. Hour or two later, I'm bored. Let's eat. Let's think about what to do. See how the cycle continues. I noticed this cycle in me, so I decided to experiment. I asked myself, what's something I could do that would give me a good feeling? And this welcome my shower phase, as I called it. I don't do it as much anymore, but I used to do it a lot when I was in the early days of overcoming my emotional eating. I would use showers. And I'm not talking about a quick rinse before work. You know, I'm a dude. I can shower before work in 5 minutes and be done. I'm talking about a real luxurious spa style shower. Candles, low lights, nice music, aromatherapy. I mean, I'd often, if I had the time, I'd start with a hot bath. And I'd set my laptop on a table, like a TV tray thing, have the lights dim, and just be relaxing in the water, letting a show play. And then when I'm ready, I would drain the water, turn on the shower. I'd have some really nice soaps, and then good exfoliating stuff for my skin. Then when I'd get out, I would use nice lotions. I got into face masks. If I had facial hair at the time, I would trim that, put some oil in it. It was just me and some quiet, feel-good time. You see, when I'd leave that bathroom, I didn't hate myself. I didn't feel bloated. I didn't regret anything. In fact, I was like, that was nice. That was really enjoyable. No fallout, right? I was not left worse off than when I started. And all I did was provide myself a little enjoyment because that's all I want. But what do you do with all this, right? What do you do? What you, the listener, even? Some of you might be thinking like, okay, cool, but what do I do when the urge hits? So here's a starting point, right? I can't answer every situation here on a podcast, but stop expecting every craving to come with a clear emotional reason, because often the why is subtle, and you need to accept that. It doesn't mean you failed if you can't find the why. Just might means it was a subtle one, or sometimes it's so obvious we look right past it. The second thing is start experimenting with alternative dopamine hits. Start creating a dopamine hit list, so to speak. Try out a whole bunch of small pleasures over time and document them. To a walk, listen to music, skincare, texting a friend, stretching, a funny show, clean your kitchen, do laundry. Shockingly, sometimes those things feel really good. Go on a lovely drive, go to a park and go for a walk, take up fishing or photography, just find all sorts of different things that provide you joy, preferably some that involve a little movement. That way, otherwise you're just going to keep defaulting to food because that's what you have. The next thing is pay attention to the after feeling. There's a difference between emotional eating and emotional nourishment. Like, does the behavior you did leave you feeling better, more positive of yourself, recharged, rejuvenated, or does it leave you with that or none of that, or does it leave you with the nice things but some shame and guilt and realizing like, oh, why did I do that? This shift in your journey is going to come from awareness to the pattern. The biggest breakthrough I had was not when I stopped emotional eating entirely. The biggest breakthroughs started happening when I stopped lying to myself about why I was eating. If I walked into the kitchen and grabbed something because it just sounded good, I would pause and ask myself out loud, why am I eating this? This thing in my hand. And as I often paused and reflected, I would see the truth there. I would often see it wasn't hunger or it was hunger. In that moment, I could notice what was happening in my heart. I had to condition myself to pause and reflect. And it's the repetition that creates the conditioning. So I repetitively would have to pause until I automatically started doing it. And I had to have a strong enough why. So I would be compelled to actually remember to pause. Because in the beginning, and just like for many of you, pausing was not automatic. It was very much something I had to consciously stop and do. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And as you do it, you'll see the answers are right there, just ready for you to see. The answers usually aren't sneaky in the moment. They're just, you're not looking. So, great question. Love this question so much. This is the Becoming Thin podcast. and we'll be right back with our next question. Welcome back to the Becoming Thin podcast. All questions this week are coming to us from the Becoming Thin community. You can learn more about the community and get involved by heading over to becomingthin.com. There you'll find a link to resources, to many resources, and one of those being you can get connected to the free Facebook group. Our next question comes to us from Dagny, who says, I noticed my weight went up when me and my dad, an alcoholic who fell off the wagon, had an argument and we stopped talking. A few weeks after that date, I noticed my trend was up from that date, which tells me that this has more impact on me than I thought. I must be emotionally eating, but I didn't see it. At that time, I wasn't tracking my calories. I was intuitively eating. What are some of the signs or things you can monitor other than the scale that point out that you might be emotionally eating? First off, Dagny, I want to acknowledge the situation you're in. Watching a loved one relapse, especially a parent, I got to imagine is pretty painful. Got to imagine that can be an emotionally messy situation. And then you said you stopped talking, so it sounds like you had to enforce a boundary. And having to set and enforce a boundary with someone you care about, I know it can feel like ripping your heart in two sometimes. So I just want to say that protecting your peace is not only okay, it's actually really brave to do that. And I want to commend you for doing something hard like that. I don't know a lot about the situation, but just from that sounds hard. And if you did it, you did a hard thing. I want to commend you for doing that and taking care of yourself. You know, you're trying to hold the boundary, stay grounded. You're trying to keep functioning. And then you notice the scale's going up, right? You realize something's happening underneath the surface. It's been happening for the last couple of weeks. You've been eating more, right? But you weren't tracking, so you didn't even see it. That's probably frustrating. And this brings up something that a lot of people need to hear. You're highlighting a problem with those seeking to lose weight with intuitive eating who haven't addressed emotional eating head on yet. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not anti-intuitive eating. In fact, I love intuitive eating. I intuitively eat now. I intuitively ate and lost a lot of my weight. I teach all of my clients to intuitively eat once they reach maintenance. Like, I'm a big fan. So I truly think intuitive eating can be a beautiful thing, but only if you've already done the work to separate your intuition from your impulses. And most people haven't. You know, especially if emotional eating has been a long-standing coping and emotional regulation strategy. Like, if you've been doing that for a while and you haven't started it, no, you're probably going to struggle with emotional eating. Because emotional eating can hide really well inside of intuitive eating. In fact, it can hide in plain sight right in front of you. You're not counting calories. You're trying to listen to your body. So, of course, you're doing intuitive eating. You want to be gentle with yourself. You want to respect your signals. But there's a catch. What if those signals have been getting hijacked by emotional impulses for years and you don't remember that? What if your body says, let's eat, not because of hunger, but because it's hurting, but you don't know that? You just think, I want to eat that thing. And so a person, when they're in this situation, tracking is problematic. Because you see, tracking, people often think, oh, tracking makes me feel so restricted. No, tracking doesn't make you feel restricted. Tracking makes you feel seen. Tracking is a spotlight. When you're tracking your calories, you'll notice, if you do it right, it's not about perfection. It's not about judging. It's just data, right? You're just documenting what you eat so you can make decisions based off of your actions. But if you are someone who is still being ruled by your unaddressed emotional eating impulses, this data, this tracking, it's a gigantic spotlight shining a light on the things that you have left in the shadows of your life, like your emotional eating. It just constantly shows you all the times you're doing it. Or the emotional eating makes it where you can't make the math, and you don't even realize that. Emotional eating makes tracking very difficult because the tracking won't let the emotional eating hide. The truth is, if you had been tracking during this time, you probably would have noticed the increase in intake sooner, but you didn't, so you noticed it with the scale. And if you were tracking, maybe, just maybe, that would have given you the chance to ask a deeper question, like, why am I eating more than normal right now? Why has this been so much harder? I was doing just fine sticking to my calorie target 2 weeks ago, and now it's hard. I haven't changed anything. What's happening? But when you're eating intuitively, you can't do that. And if you're eating intuitively and the emotions are strong, and you're still eating emotionally, you probably won't notice. A lot of times when a person's doing intuitive eating and they're still being ruled by emotional eating impulses, they'll chalk it up to like, well, I'm just doing what my body wants. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes it is. But other times it's not true. Other times it's your pain talking, not your hunger. No, I'm not trying to say that calorie tracking definitively would have stopped you. It might not have. What I've seen over the years of coaching people through this is many people who struggle with emotional eating impulses, they'll talk themselves out of tracking. The discomfort of the spotlight, sometimes it's just too much for a person. And so they talk themselves out of it, so that they don't do it anymore. That way they're out of the spotlight. But they don't say that. They just say, I feel restricted. I shouldn't feel restricted. This is bad. I'm being robbed of the feelings I want to feel. It's not wrong to want to feel good. And this tracking is making it where I can't. I feel controlled. I mean, you don't feel controlled. You feel aware, and you're saying it's control, but it's actually just awareness. And you don't want to be aware, because if you're aware, you'll do something about it. And you don't want to do something about it. That other side of you doesn't. But let's get to your actual question. What can I watch for if I'm not tracking the scale or counting calories? What are the signs I'm emotionally eating? So emotional eating doesn't always look like a binge. Most people picture a dramatic moment, tears, ice cream, 3,000 calories in one sitting. But that's not most of what it is. Yes, it is there for many people, but it's not most of what it is. Most of the time, emotionally eating looks normal. Most of the time, it looks like grabbing a snack during a show. It looks like going to Buffalo Wild Wings for lunch. It looks like adding a few more bites when you're already full. It's subtle. It's socially acceptable in a lot of circumstances, especially if all your buddies emotionally eat. It blends in. And that's what makes it so hard to catch. Because unless you've built a way to detect this smaller stuff, you won't notice it. And because it's small, it happens in large volumes. No particular time is a problem. Having that bowl of ice cream once isn't a problem. It's when you did that and you paired it with 25 other just onces. So we have to create a litmus test. We have to have some way, a line in the sand, as it were, so that when you cross it, we know, I might be emotionally eating here. So here's what I tell my clients. If you want to spot emotionally eating in the wild, you have to draw a line in the sand that it's a simple test that you can run in the moment. It's got to be simple, like super, super simple. If it's not super simple in the moment when you're under the spell of your emotions, you won't do it. And we have to create awareness, because awareness is always the first step to recovery. But we have to create awareness to when the problem is occurring in the moment. We have to be aware as it's happening, not aware of it 2 weeks later. It's too late. You've already done it. You have to be aware you're doing it as you're doing it. And that is going to be painful sometimes. So here's a tactic that I found works well, though, because once you do this, once you find this, you can start to work on it and improve. It's actually the one I used. My weight loss journey began at the end of June 6 years ago. We just passed the anniversary of my journey. And I was using this exact same one 6 years ago on my emotional eating recovery. Here's the tactic I'll give you. For 1 month, only 1 month, for 100% of the time, eat only when you're physically hungry, only if it's a designated mealtime, or if it's a designated mealtime, and you can only have treats if they were planned at least 24 hours in advance. That's it. the whole thing. When you do that, that is going to flesh out a good portion of your emotional eating. So let me explain a little more in detail what I mean. Physically hungry, as in like you can detect the physical sensations of hunger. Now, some of you, when you first try this for the very first time, don't be surprised if you don't get hungry till 5 o'clock the next day. Very normal. It's not going to keep happening that way. So give it a few days and your system will normalize. Because many of you were regularly feeding your body food. It had so much extra energy in its system, it didn't need to eat until 5. That will not keep happening. And then, but let's say it's like lunchtime and you're not hungry and you're not going to have a chance to eat again for 5 hours. Well, go ahead and eat anyway. If it's a designated lunch, but eat a smaller portion than you normally would by any amount. Okay? Have a snack handy if you can. So you got to do it. That's the only exception. Designated mealtime, and only because you will have no ability to be around food when the hunger shows up. And treats, snacks, you can have them. Whatever, just you got to have identified it 24 hours in advance. Oh, and when you pre-plan the treat, you have to also pre-plan the portion. You don't get to say, I'll have ice cream every night with my TV show, and then at the moment you get to decide how much goes in the bowl. No, weigh it. You pick however much you want. You decide. If tomorrow you're like, you know what? I'm going to have 2 scoops of ice cream. That's what I'm going to have. Then you get 2 scoops, weigh it, and go, there's your portion. I will have this much of ice cream. All right? Don't decide in the moment, because you might decide, I'm going to have 9 scoops of ice cream. I said I can have 1 bowl, but I didn't say it couldn't be a big bowl. Cheat code. No, we're going to try to get past this. You decide in advance how much, of what kind, and preferably even what time, when. The goal is not to deprive you. This isn't punishment. It's not. It's not a restriction. Let me say something. Be very clear. If you're doing this assignment, you can eat any food you want. Nothing is off limits. We're putting restrictions on how much and how often by regulating it with hunger. The goal here with this assignment is to give yourself a simple and doable plan of action. A simple and doable plan of action so that you can catch it in the moment. You got to catch emotional eating in the moment it's arriving so you can begin to work on it. The first skill is to become good at noticing emotional eating in the moment it's happening. That's the first skill. When you've mastered that skill, every other skill is easier past that. But this is the hardest one. Unfortunately, I have to start with the hardest. So that means the moment you go for a snack, even though you're not hungry, you have to pause and go, here I am. I'm getting this snack. This wasn't on my plan, and I'm definitely not hungry. Okay. What you're trying to do is spot the pattern. All right? We're not doing this to get mistakes so that you can tell yourself you're a lost cause, though. Don't do that. Don't be like, oh, I'm so terrible. Look, here's another time I'm doing it. I'm just the worst. No, don't do that. What we're looking for is clues. You're a detective. You only have so much focus and attention that you can put towards your transformation. By doing this and collecting all the clues on where to look, you'll know where to focus your efforts of transformation. Yeah. So when you find it, you can ask yourself questions like, why did I eat this when I wasn't hungry this afternoon? Was I trying to avoid an emotion? Was I tired, lonely, frustrated, restless? Was I bored? Was I happy and trying to keep the party going? I mean, you get the idea, right? You see where I'm going here? You just ask yourself, get present with your state of mind. Sometimes the trigger will be obvious. Sometimes it'll be subtle. But every time you pause, ask yourself these questions and go within, your awareness gets strengthened. But here's the cool thing. Every time you do this, you make it easier to start breaking the pattern in the future. Every single time you do it. Every single time. It's just a little bit. It's not a lot, but just a little bit. But here's something to remember. You're not addicted to the food. You're not addicted to the food. You're addicted to the feeling you believe the food will bring you. You're not chasing the food. You're chasing the emotion. Always remember that. Now, I'm not trying to suggest with my answer here that a person needs to live their life with this super highly structured, only eat when you're hungry forever. I am not suggesting that. What I'm doing in this episode is giving advice to people who are in the beginning of their emotional eating recovery journey, who haven't got a handle on it. What do you do then? Now, if you're going to do this, you're going to try to pull the metaphorical curtain back, so to speak. Structure is the key here. And what we want to do is add just some structure, but only just enough. And that's what we're doing with this assignment. So if emotional eating is regularly causing setbacks in your life, here's something to consider. Maybe now's not the time to focus on weight loss. Maybe now it's time to focus on getting a grip on your emotional eating. Not forever, maybe just for a month or two. You can get a lot covered in just 2 or 3 months of laser focused with your entire mind working on your emotional eating. We just need to learn what's happening. We need to spot the problems so we can begin working on them, so that when you're doing intuitive eating, you can be like, this isn't my intuition talking, this is my impulses talking. You need to be able to detect the difference. And rather than trying to just do it all at once, do one of them. Do one of them. You got to become a pattern hunter. You're always seeking for that pattern moment. And you're going to be building self-trust here, because when you draw that line in the sand and when you catch yourself crossing it and you course correct, you're doing the opposite of self-sabotage in that moment. You're building a better relationship with yourself. You're improving your self-confidence. And then the last thing I want to address from your question, you mentioned the scale. Don't wait for the scale to tell you the truth. That was a problem. Because the scale is usually the last place emotional eating will manifest. That's the last place you're going to see the results of it. Because by the time the weight is trending up, the pattern's already happened. The food has already been eaten. The damage is already done. The pattern has had another rep to strengthen it, making you more likely to do it again in the future. So if you're working on emotional eating, don't wait for the scale to start moving, to start investigating. Don't wait. It's too late. It's already over. Start investigating now. Set a structure and a line in the sand now, before the scale gets involved. Create your rules now. That's how you'll catch your emotional eating in real time, by doing it now. That's how you start interrupting the pattern. And that's how you start reclaiming your power over your emotional eating impulses. Thank you so much for this question. We'll be back in a moment, and this is the Becoming Thin podcast. Welcome back to the Becoming Thin podcast. If you have not yet done so, please give the podcast a rating and a review. Also, if something stands out to you in this episode, or actually any episode, tag me in the Becoming Thin Facebook group. Make a post, tell me what stood out to you. I'd love to hear about it. You could also leave a comment if you're listening on YouTube or Spotify. I love hearing from you. I love reading your comments. I read every single one of them. It energizes me, and it also lately has been really helping me shape the content here on the Becoming Thin podcast by directly interacting with you. Remember, I'm making this podcast for you because you're the hero of this story. So come engage. Would love to get to meet you. Now, this excellent, very excellent question comes to us from Megan. Megan says, when you are emotional eating, what questions are helpful to ask yourself to help figure out why it's happening, so that you can understand how to solve or improve future renditions of that specific emotional eat? I like this question. It shows that Megan is doing one of the hardest things already. Noticing. Noticing. She's recognizing that the eating is emotional, and she's asking the right follow-up. How do I figure out what's really going on? And this is how the mastery begins, from a place of curiosity. Because if you can figure out why you emotionally eat, if you can trace it back, you've got a shot at actually interrupting the pattern next time. And I like how you worded it here, where it's like how to improve or solve the future renditions of that specific emotional eat. And I like that you're even identifying that they're not all exactly the same, that specific one. But to really answer your question, we need to break it down further. So there are different phases of an emotional eating episode. And, now some of these are very fast. You just zip right through them. And some of them, it's like the full-blown fuck it's, right? So let's think of it as we're teaching the phases as the full-blown fuck it's, because those are the easiest to sort of spot and conceptualize. Because each phase calls for a different kind of question or response. So let's go through the four phases first. So the phase one is before you feel triggered. Honestly, everything feels fine. Phase two is when the urge to engage with the emotional eating is building, or this is also referred to as the bargaining phase. Phase 3 is the loss of control moment. It's that point where it's the bargaining and the engaging is building and building and building, and then snap. You're fully in it. You're out of control. And then phase 4 is after the storm. It's the aftermath. Now, each of these 4 stages, if your awareness happens within these stages, and it will be in one of the 4, depending on which stage you're in, you have to take a slightly different approach. Let's just zip through them one by one. Stage 1, before the urge hits. You can think of it as like a calm before a storm. So this phase is invisible unless you've done the work. You might not even realize that you're drifting towards emotional eating until you've done the work, right? A lot of people don't realize it until after it's happened or until it's already started. But if you're working on building awareness, you might start catching little clues leading up to it, like a familiar sense of restlessness or like a weird craving or like these images that keep getting served in your mind of you eating a very specific food. You're still in complete and total control here. But under the surface, that pressure is just starting to build. That urge is just starting to build. And at this stage, the question isn't, what should I do? No. It's, am I about to bargain with myself? Because if you can catch the negotiation phase before it starts, you've weakened the cycle. Because after phase 1 is the negotiation. You got to catch yourself before you begin the bargaining. So call awareness that. Am I about to start bargaining for myself? Because when you hear the bargaining, you'll be like, oh my gosh, the pattern is continuing. I'm bargaining. There it is. Let's talk about phase 2, the bargaining phase. AKA, you're beginning to justify what you're wanting to do. You're pre-gretting it. This is where things get pretty interesting. Because, a lot of times in this phase, when it begins, the bargaining phase, you haven't actually eaten yet. You're just thinking about it. Maybe you walk into the kitchen, maybe you open the fridge, look at the stuff in the drawers, check the pantry. You already know what's in there, but let me just go look. Let me see if anything catches my eye. And now you're starting to make deals with yourself, right? Oh, I've been good all week, it's just this one time. I'll work it off tomorrow. I've had a long day. I really need some. Just feel pretty good. I deserve this. I've been so good on my plan. I've really earned this treat. You see, this is when you want to stop and ask yourself something. 2 questions. Why am I eating? And why am I eating what I'm about to pick? And I don't mean the surface level answer. The one where you're like, oh, just because I want it. I don't mean that one. I mean, get deeper. So the best way to get deeper is ask the question, why am I about to eat? Why do I want to eat right now? And then answer it and then say, why? So it might be like, do this 3 times. Why do I want this? Because I'm tired. Okay. Why is being tired making me want to eat food right now? Because I think it'll make me feel better. Okay. Why do you need to feel better right now, self? And then all of a sudden, now you're getting closer to the real reason. It's not about chips. It's about needing relief or comfort or a sense of control, or maybe it's just, you just want to feel something different than what you're feeling right now. Or maybe you're feeling nothing and you want to feel something. Look, even if you still eat afterwards, that moment of little clarity and reflection will set you up for success next time because you've picked up a little bit more information that you can carry with you to try to sabotage the autopilot. But let's say you didn't catch it and you're catching it in stage 3, the full-on trigger moment where you're sliding on ice. All right. Look, let's get real with each other. Sometimes you're going to lose control. You're going to. Everybody does when they're doing emotional eating work. When they're working on overcoming their emotional eating impulses, setbacks are going to happen. It's just going to happen. Because the first step is awareness, but awareness isn't solving. Without awareness, you cannot solve. But awareness means the pattern is still happening. So you have to create awareness to your problems without fixing your problems so that you can understand your problems so that you can then fix them. Which means if you have a terrible relationship with failure, you won't do it. If you are critical or mean to yourself, you won't do it. If you assign some sort of deeper existential judgment of your worth based off of it, you won't do it. All right? You got to learn to look at it from a state of curiosity and neutrality and empathy, compassion. But let's get back to what I'm saying. You've lost it. You're eating, and you know you're eating, and some part of you knows this isn't helpful, but the rest of you just doesn't care. Look, when that happens, you're already in the loop. When that happens, it's too late for strategic questions. You're in the emotional equivalent of sliding on ice in a vehicle. The wheel is spinning and you're just hoping you don't crash into a wall. This is not the moment to be figuring it out. It's the moment you just got to hang on, right? You do the best you can. And that's okay. There's still a chance to learn something. But the learning something usually comes in the next phase, phase 4, the aftermath, post-storm clarity. The food's been eaten, storm's passed, the shame might be settling in, fog is lifting, and now you get to decide what comes next. You have a choice. You can judge yourself, or you can study yourself. Personally, I recommend choosing study over shame. That's what I did. My life's only gotten better ever since I started doing that. And when I just chose shame over study, I just kept feeling worse and worse and worse. So here's a question I'd recommend asking every single time. What was I doing right before I decided to eat? That's it. No big analysis, no judgment, just a sentence, a note. What was I doing right before I decided to eat? Fighting with my husband. Okay. What was I doing right before I decided to eat? Working on taxes. Scrolling on TikTok and saw something that made me feel lonely. Was thinking about how tired I am. I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. Just keep a running list. Just put a note in your phone, a running note. Every time it happens, jot it down. One line. You're not trying to stop it. Remember what I said? We're trying to see the pattern. We're trying to create awareness while the pattern is happening. And if you're trying to be a perfectionist, you won't let the pattern fire off, so you won't ever get to learn anything. And when the pattern fires off, you're being so shameful of yourself, you won't let yourself look to learn the lessons. And so you end up stuck in a rut. Remember, overcoming emotional eating impulses comes down to being able to effectively recognize the pattern in real time, not from perfection. Now, as you do this, after you document yourself and study yourself a little bit, you'll start to notice things like, wow, I almost always am eating food every day at 3 o'clock. And it's always because like I'm just, my head is tired. It always seems to happen when I'm doing my finances. The temptation hits the hardest right after I talk to my mom. Whenever I got to sit down and do homework, I just feel like I got to have a snack. See, that awareness, that's your fuel for your power. Because now in the future, you're not going to be reacting. You're going to be predicting and anticipating what's going to happen because you've studied yourself on paper. And then you can like see these repetitive patterns and go, all right, I need to create a strategy to help avoid this or to handle me in a different way. Now, but one more thought on the food itself. I want to focus back to the second question I suggested earlier. Why am I eating this? That's a sneaky, powerful question because think about it. You live in a world with basically unlimited food options for most of you. For most of you, you could cook almost anything you want. You could order any ingredient, get a YouTube video to teach you how to do it, and order any appliances and food ingredients you don't have. So think about it. For the most part, you can have anything you want. If you live in a big city, you can go to any restaurant, go to specialty grocery stores and get almost anything you want. Why the cookie? Why the chips? Why that specific ice cream flavor? Why that specific food from that specific fast food place? What feeling does that specific food represent? Is it comfort? Is it rebellion? Is it nostalgia? Is it defiance? Is it something from childhood? Is it something forbidden? Is it something just makes you feel good and you don't even know why? You see, if you ask the question, why? Why do I want to eat this specific food? If you ask it before you eat it, even if you still eat it anyway, just ask it anyway. Once you see the emotional threads that are attached to that food, it becomes a whole lot easier in that moment to go, wait, I don't know if I actually want this. So stop seeking to win. Stop seeking to be perfect. Seek instead to understand. Seek to understand yourself, your true motives. And if you're just getting started, don't set the bar at stopping emotional eating entirely. I'm telling you, if you're just at the beginning of your emotional eating journey, don't make that the goal. That's too much pressure. I know. You hate that you can't just stop. You feel like that makes you somehow less than. That's just false. That's not how it works. We all have our things we have to work and overcome. This is yours. Set the bar to understand, not to change. Once you understand it, changing it will become easier. Ask these questions. Why am I eating? Why this food? What was I doing right before? What emotion or experience might I be avoiding or chasing? Write it down. Look for patterns. If you can name it, you can tame it. That's how you go from feeling powerless, out of control, to feeling curious. And then when you feel curious and you start having more information, everything will slowly begin to change. I hope this helps you out, Megan. All right. We'll be back in a moment with our last question. This is the Becoming Thin podcast. Welcome back to the Becoming Thin podcast. Here we chase failures to extract lessons, and we don't give up on ourselves in the process. This episode is all things emotional eating. And our last question is one that everyone needs to listen up with if you're at all or even a little bit suspicious about emotional eating. Because this is one of the most common sources of self-sabotage when doing emotional eating recovery work. So this question comes to us from, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Heike. I looked it up. I think I said that right. Is it realistic to get rid of emotional eating at all? What are your thoughts on controlled emotional eating? For example, I know I'm not hungry. I want this to feel comforted. I can fit it into my weekly calorie target. Okay. This is one of those questions that looks and sounds simple on the surface, but underneath it gets quickly more complex. So let's dive right into this question that we're going to wrap up with. I'm so glad this question was asked because I really want to talk about this. Before I deep dive, I want to state that I believe this question is coming from a very common place and a place rooted in reasonable thinking. But I think we need to have some real talk here about this. When you're doing emotional eating recovery work, you will often find yourself in a place where you know you're emotionally eating, you're aware of it, and you're wondering, is there a way I can keep doing this but make it okay? And honestly, I've had that conversation with myself lots and lots of times before, but not just about food. As we dive into this, let me tell you a story. Something my father-in-law taught me about control with addiction things. And I know I said that they're different, but there's many aspects that are the same. But I was talking with my father-in-law, who's a recovering alcoholic, been sober for decades, and I've for a few years I've been learning a lot about AA because I see a lot of helpful tactics that they use that I transferred to my emotional eating work. Now, he told me something that really stuck with me because I asked him to tell me his story of sobriety. How did he come to be sober, and what was that journey like? And he said, when I first went to AA, I wasn't hoping to stop drinking. I was hoping to learn how to drink without ruining my life. His goal wasn't to stop drinking. He didn't want to give it up. He wanted to manage it, to control it. Now, for him, as an alcoholic, that was never going to work. It didn't. His relationship with alcohol wasn't physical only. It was also emotional. It was tied to his identity, his behavior, his pain, his coping. It was woven into the very fabric of his life. But here's what's interesting. Me, Chris Terrell, I can drink. I'm not an alcoholic. I can have a drink socially. I can have a beer after a long day. It does not create chaos in my life. It's not a pattern that spirals for me. Now, I'm not saying that drinking is good or bad. That's not the point of what I'm saying. The point is this. What's okay for one person might be a minefield for someone else. So can you emotionally eat? Sure. But should you? That's the bigger question. Not should everyone, should you? So let's go back to the original question. Is it okay to emotionally eat if you can still fit it in your calories? Well, it depends. If you have a long-term pattern of emotional eating that has been regularly sabotaging your health, your goals, your self-respect, your ability to lose weight or to maintain it, well, you need to hear this. You're playing with fire and acting like it's not dangerous. You may think you're controlling your emotional eating. You may feel like you've got a handle on it. But for a lot of us, that's just your addiction talking. Now, when I say addiction, I don't mean addiction to the food. I mean addiction to the pattern, addiction to the feeling the food gives you, addiction to the relief that comes from the behavior, the comfort You're addicted to the outcome. So when you say, I know I'm not hungry, I just want to feel comforted and I can fit it in. What I hear is, I'm trying to find a way to justify continuing the cycle, but make it look respectable and responsible. And trust me, I get it. The reason why I can spot that is because I've done the exact same thing. You can't bullshit a bullshitter. Let me call something out directly. And I'm saying this with all the love in the world from somebody that has been exactly where you are, but I am not going to sugarcoat this right now. I'm going to say this blunt. I can fit it into my calories, so it's fine. That's junkie logic. That's the same mindset as the alcoholic saying, I'll just have one drink. See, I had one drink. I'm still in control. That's the same logic as the person saying, I'll just use a little bit of my heroin. It's just enough to take the edge off. I'll be fine tomorrow. It's just a little meth. It's no problem. The worst thing that can happen to a recovering addict is to relapse and have it go well. Because now they're going to think they're better. Now they're going to think they've got it handled. And that's when the spiral begins. One drink becomes two becomes three. Controlled emotional eating becomes habitual emotional eating. And bam, just like that. In 2 or 3 months, you're right back into the pattern. So is it ever okay to emotionally eat? Yes, actually it can be. But here's a catch. Hold on. I need to reframe this. I don't believe in controlled emotional eating. I believe in controlled enjoyment of food. Let me say that again. I believe in controlled enjoyment, not controlled emotional eating. Let me explain that deeper. If it's your birthday and you plan to have a slice of cake because you want to mark the occasion with joy, cool. That's celebration. It's part of life. If you're going to the movies and you planned ahead to enjoy a little popcorn because that enhances the experience for you, awesome. That's part of living. But here's the key. You planned it. You put up guardrails. And you're not using it to numb or distract or to soothe something you haven't dealt with. Let me give you a little real life example. I'm going to the movies this weekend to see the new Superman movie. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and yeah, I love Superman movies. I've seen every one in theater multiple times that I've been alive for. And yeah, I fully plan to have popcorn at this theater when I have it. Not because I'm stressed, not because I've had a hard day, not because I deserve a treat. I'm doing it because I enjoy the ritual. I enjoy the moment. I've been planning for this for months. I've already created a plan for how I'm going to handle my calories. I'm in a deficit right now. I'll likely either skip lunch or have a smaller one, depending on the movie time. And I'll let all my snack calories come from the popcorn and movie snacks. That's just part of the plan. Now, technically, it is for an emotional reason, joy, but it's not impulsive. It's not reactive, and it's not a slippery slope. That's the difference. So for you listening, wondering if you can keep emotional eating in your life, you need to be the one to decide that, not me. But ask yourself a question. Is what I'm about to do, is this a pattern or a choice? Here's what I'd encourage you to ask yourself, not just once, but every time. This decision to eat this emotionally, is this part of a pattern that's hurt me in the past? Am I emotionally regulated? Am I making this choice consciously? Have I made this kind of choice repeatedly under the same emotional conditions? If the answer is yes to any of those, you need to be really, really cautious. You may not just be, quote unquote, enjoying food. You may be justifying comfort eating under a new label. Look, I'm not saying never eat for emotion. I got to keep reiterating that. I'm saying be honest with yourself. So do I think it's realistic to never emotionally eat again? As I've said, no, not at all. This is where food is different than alcohol or drugs. We have to eat. And sometimes food is emotional, and that's okay. Having cake at a wedding, sharing dessert on a date, making grandma's cornbread at Thanksgiving. These are human moments. They matter. What I'm talking about is a repetitive pattern of emotionally eating to manage your life, feelings, and emotions as a coping strategy. That's the thing that keeps people stuck and creates an entirely new problem of weight gain. That's what keeps people from becoming thin. That's what keeps the scale from yo-yoing back up every time you lose weight. If you know emotional eating has been your downfall, It's not enough to say, well, I'll just do it in moderation. No, you need a plan. You need boundaries. You need awareness. Most of all, you need radical, and I mean radical self-honesty. Because yes, you can enjoy food, but if you can't be completely honest with yourself and transparent with yourself when you do it, no, you can't. You can't lie to yourself about why you're doing it and still expect to make progress. No, that's junkie talk. So don't ask yourself if it's okay to emotionally eat. Ask yourself if you're actually in control. If the answer is yes and it's real, go enjoy the popcorn. If not, maybe you should put it down this time and pick up your journal instead. Great question. Thank you so much for asking this question and letting us touch on this. All right, go work on your emotional eating journey. Go work on mastering your impulses, learning who you are, creating awareness to the problematic patterns in your life that are keeping you stuck. It'll transform your life. Go draw a line in the sand for a month if you need to. Be gentle with you, though, when you do it. Emotional eating work was going to be fraught with setbacks. Expect them and approach yourself compassionately. Remember, being critical of yourself when you're down will not help. It will only make things worse. Be compassionate with yourself when you're down. Be empathetic. Assume good intentions from you, but don't give up the work. Get a lesson out of every setback. I'll see you next week on the Becoming Thin podcast.